one thing that we have seen in Baltimore City, due to the consent decree and other infrastructure, is what people will call a cop city. And so we're trying to see how we can work through that and be able to organize within the community to make sure that they're not popping up everywhere. But yes, I completely agree around the idea that public safety does not equate to police departments, because that's not what keeps people safe. And so I saw some news, I don't know if it was today or recently, that Chicago has voted, or a specific part in Chicago has voted that school resource officers to be removed from, or student resource officers to be removed from schools. So there are other individuals, like there are people in other states and other counties who are moving towards that, and hopefully we can get Maryland there, because I know that Maryland is considered to be very progressive, but we are definitely behind in a lot of things.
What's there's this program in West Baltimore specifically that they're touting as like led to 25% reduction in gun violence and carjackings. Is that, I don't know if it's the same or?
I don't know if it's state streets, but there's a lot of programs in West Baltimore that work towards like violence disruption that doesn't involve police. I don't want to say it's state streets without being 100% sure.
Yeah, I mean, I have a little link to it in my talking points here. It really caught my eye, because I know it's, it is that sort of model that you're talking about.
We should maybe talk about doing some of the
and they work. They're showing that they work. You mentioned the example of Camden, New Jersey, was it? Mm-hmm. And so it is happening. I think people, I think sometimes it's easier to focus on what has been done and what we have and improving that, because it's just easier, right? It's a lot more difficult to be able to disrupt that and say, like, we know this isn't working and we need to build long term. And so that's just going to take a longer time, but I think all of it comes from organizing and being able to educate ourselves, because Fox News is a multi-million-dollar industry. I'm sure multi-billion-dollar, and they don't have any paywalls. So like all their information that they're putting out, whether it's false or not, people have access to it really quickly because it's free. And so when you're seeing that, and that's what, like, you're reading these headlines that are very provocative, that are like, they're clickbait, that's what people think is happening. And a lot of times it's like carjackings, and they'll say like a 10-year-old is carjacking, and that's where they get you. And I guess the solution that people see is, well, let's get them in jail, like let's charge them, let's do this, and they don't focus on anything else. So it's very they don't go to like what is happening behind that. Are they, like what's happening in their home life, what's happening somewhere else. They just go straight to jail. So it's very disappointing.
We know there are models, across the country that are addressing and having some good impact, right? I think, and I'm just going to speak for Prince George's County alone, the fact that there are models, it doesn't matter to them. They're not listening. Like, they don't want to listen. They're not invested in that type of solution. They want to keep the status quo moving the way it is, despite all the evidence, all the data, all the statistics that we have that these things could work and be helpful to the community. So, unfortunately, that's where we are. Let's go ahead and let's talk about this specific bill, HB814 SB 744, right?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, same bill, same terrible, just bad all the way around. So you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so I mean, well,
presentation?
what I brought, I'll try not to take too much time with it, but sort of a background about, to sort of zoom out and look at the past 10 years in Maryland and sort of dispel some of those myths that are going around. So of course, without always don't want to minimize victims of crime and the effect crime has in the community, and the kids that we represent are often the most affected by crime in their communities. But just to sort of reiterate what was said before, like the most alarming thing to me is sort of this return of really of demonization of youth, and probably everyone knows about the super predator myth in the 90s, where they used, compared young people to wolves and all this like super racist, super just awful political language and changes to the law that led to where many more youth in this country and in Maryland were being tried as adults and incarcerated as adults and getting these long prison sentences. And while there's certainly been some changes to how the political class and everyone talks about these things, that the sort of overall vibe of blaming kids for societal problems and wanting to lock kids up is really back, and it's really alarming. So we just want, we want children to be treated as children. We want, incarceration to be a last resort, and we want, to do things that actually work to help kids and to protect the community instead of things that are just, sort of political band-aids or, ineffective or really harmful legislation. So, to show a couple little, some data from the state government. So
can I add a little bit?
Yeah.
Just before you go forward on that predator piece, of course, we know the big popularization of that term was Hillary Clinton.
Absolutely.
And that crime bill was written by
Her husband.
Joe Biden.
Oh.
Biden wrote that crime bill. So I'm just adding that to say, any notions that we have that the Democratic Party, and this is not a cart for the Republican Party, any notions that we have the Democratic Party is coming to our rescue, forget it.
Mm-hmm.
Their track record is not much better.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to add that.
So this is the sort of last about 10 years of juvenile complaints in Maryland. So this is, just to show that we're still far below what we were 10 years ago. I mean, 2020, 2021, the pandemic was a very unusual year, and it did lead to there being probably less. I'm not going to pretend to know why some of these things happened, but there was just a lot less kids arrested in 2021, and it's starting to rebound from that, and that gives them this talking point. Oh, arrests are up 50% from last year, yada yada. But if you look at, it's still way down from from around 2013 or 14, and that's just important context. This sort of breaks it out by violent crimes and things, and there certainly has been in the past. I mean, I see this in my job. There's been some uptick in youth being arrested for crimes of violence, for serious felonies like carjackings and shootings and things like that. But it's still below where it was 10 years ago. So it's, again, if you sort of pretend the pandemic never happened and just look at the last 2 years, like, it looks like crime is skyrocketing out of control. And again, not to minimize. I mean, we all live in a community where we're affected by crime, so I certainly don't want to minimize it, but it is still down from where it was 10 years ago. And it's just dishonest to sort of just look at the last 2 years. Something very unusual was happening 2 years ago. And then, there's the question of, like, why are kids being blamed? And this, I mean, as someone who I've spent my whole career working with kids in the system, I mean, this is the part that really, one of the things that really bothers me is the sort of blaming of kids for the overall problem. I mean, what sense does it make to say that it's children's fault that there are so many guns in this country? Is it children's fault that, the communities they grow up in? So it's really, it's scapegoating. It's and there's just no evidence that children play an outsized role in crime in Maryland. I mean, there's still a small percent of all arrests, a small percent of murder arrests, and if you just break it down, and I know that there are other statistics out there. We're not going to put them all, but the bottom line is that we can't be blaming children for them. We need to take care of children. We need to give children resources they need to succeed, and certainly respond when children are involved in violent crime. But it's just not true that children are an outsized or have an outsized role as compared to adults in crime in Maryland. And this was a chart that the Department of Juvenile Services released, and you know, again, without sort of making excuses for them or anything, the DJS always gets a bad rap in the politics. But I do have some faith in the new leadership of DJS. The new leader is someone who's a real, Vinny Schiraldi has spent his whole career as an anti-incarceration reformer, and they released this data set, and there was media for it a few months ago to again give some context to what's actually going on. And this shows how the youth, young people, have been affected by violence in the community. So you can't blame the children without also acknowledging that they're as victims, as people who experience community violence. And that is certainly something I've seen in my work. I mean, the degree to which the children I represent have friends who've been murdered, have been shot themselves, have family members affected by violence, has certainly increased. And this idea of trying to sort of talk about victims on one hand and youth crime on the other just doesn't acknowledge the fact that these kids are really suffering and they really need they need things like grief counseling and just to be taken care of in a way that's not punitive and not just sort of blaming them for the violence that they've experienced in their lives. So I'm going to show a few things. I mean, the issue that I really focus on my work, probably above all else, is the youth being charged as adults. Frankly, I'm not 100% sure if there is any legislation even pending right now about the issue of youth being charged as adults, but certainly when youth are being demonized, I've seen news articles and local news recently sort of basically saying that kids who commit violent crimes should be charged as adults, should be incarcerated as adults, and that really goes back to that super predator myth of the 90s. That was the biggest policy change that came out of that. And in Maryland, this is an extremely racially discriminatory practice. I mean, virtually all the youth who are charged as adults in Maryland are black and brown kids. I think in this, probably a good amount of those kids listed as white in this are because it's not broken out by ethnicity, are likely Hispanic. I've represented hundreds of kids charged as adults. I don't know if I've ever represented a white kid charged as adults in Prince George's County. I'm trying to say maybe there was one at some point, but it's really shocking the degree to which this is a policy that only affects black and brown children. And there's been some state reports that really call out Maryland. So Human Rights for Kids. I'll talk a little bit. There's a bill, the JJRA, was passed 2 years ago, the Juvenile Justice Reform Act. That's what the legislature is trying to undo parts of today. This report came out before that, but this is Human Rights for Kids, a very well-known national nonprofit, rated Maryland as one of the worst human rights offenders for children in the entire country. So someone said we'd like to think Maryland is more progressive, but in many ways we are right there with Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana. As in fact, looks like Mississippi did better than us on this one.
Yeah, I think they did. Mississippi beat us.
Yeah.
So we're higher than them now.
Whenever you lose to Mississippi.
So, Ian, can I ask you a question just for clarity for conversations with others? To be clear, it's not that white children don't commit these crimes, or they don't commit the same crimes. It's just that, would it be correct to say that black children or children of color are charged differently?
There's certainly, nationwide. Because
you hear that argument, then these are the kids that's doing it. But
I mean, I think there's, you could really, there's been a lot of work to study racial disparities in the justice system, tons of reports, and to try to identify, but they're obviously there. I mean, you could probably name 5 different reasons, whether it's overcharging and economic conditions and policing. I mean, you could sort of identify all these different reasons for it, and that's certainly, I'm not a social scientist. While I read a lot of these things, I don't want to claim to have extensive knowledge, but yeah, I mean, clearly this is a racially discriminatory. You couldn't look at these numbers and not acknowledge that the practice of trying youth in the adult system has had a racially discriminatory effect. It applies far more to black youth than to white youth. I mean, there would be a whole number of reasons for that. And that's, only part of why we were listed as one of the worst human rights offenders in this report. It was also because we had, 9, 10, 11-year-olds being charged in juvenile court. Because we had youth incarcerated for, misdemeanors and technical violations of probation. So a lot of the things that this bill addressed, that did what's called the JJRA, the Juvenile Justice Reform Act, the things that bill addressed in 2021, which are now trying to be undone by the legislature, helped us get from like the worst human rights offender to like not quite the worst. And if we undo it, then we'll go right back to being the worst. And this is similar, this is the racial disparity. And I always try, I think one thing that we as public defenders struggle to do is to bring these racial justice arguments to the cases we're arguing in court. It always, it's complicated, right? Judges often don't like to hear it. Often I'm a white public defender in front of a black judge and a black prosecutor, and this can really upset people to start talking about this. But I do feel it's very important that we talk about it because this is what's actually happening. So, this is basically the same stats I was showing before, just the outrageously disproportionate. Obviously, black youth are not 83% of the children. Actually, I put the stat up there. It's 31%. So that's over 2.5. A black child is over 2.5 times more likely to be charged an adult in Maryland than a white child. And like I said, I think a good chunk of those white children are probably Hispanic.
Ian, I'm so sorry.
Sure.
I have a question because I don't identify as white, but in the government system, my race is white. So I always choose other, but they always put me as white. Why do the statistics not show like non-white Hispanic and white Hispanic?
So again, I'm no expert on the gathering of these statistics, so I'll caveat that. But my understanding, there's the very rightful, efforts to break out ethnicity and race, right? You can be black and Hispanic. So the census doesn't ask those together, right? Because you choose a race and you choose an ethnicity, and people can identify however they choose. And I think from a identity standpoint, that makes sense. But when you look at these statistics, and even when I would try to keep my own statistics, which I do sometimes to just keep track of who we're representing, it does sort of obscure, the fact that pretty much all these kids are black and Hispanic because, if a Hispanic kid, either chooses other or white or something as their race, and then, you'd have to have a separate chart of ethnicity, and that would just, a lot of the black youth would be non-Hispanic. It gets hard to represent in a simple pie chart. But just the reality of it is that, as far as I know, Prince George's County, at least, all the youth being tried as adults are black and Hispanic, with few exceptions.
With that, I was going to, obviously, Prince George's County's population is, black population is larger.
It's larger, yeah.
Do you have a Prince George's County version of this?
I don't. And it is like you were just saying. Prince George's has some different aspects to it because it is, certainly the Prince George's majority black and all that, but the disparities are still there.
Still there.
The disparities are still there. It sort of obscures them maybe a little bit, or makes it easier to make excuses for it. But I think it's worth looking at the statewide because we're talking about statewide legislation, and this is the reality of the state. Look at the parts of the state that are predominantly white. They're finding some way to not track kids as adults at the same rate in those parts of the state. So, and then this is what you were just saying, the report that called us out as having the worst racial disparity in our prison system. So that's talking about youth in the adult criminal justice system, and why I'm talking about the need to keep more children in the juvenile system. This is why we rate so terribly, is because of how many youth are tried as adults in Maryland. And our law in Maryland basically lists 23 offenses for which all children are charged as adults. And then we go to court and we try to argue to the court to move those down to juvenile court. But there's no, not even the police or the prosecution can say, oh, let's start this kid in juvenile court. It's automatic for 23 offenses. And there was a bill in the last legislative session called the Yes Act to at least start those cases in juvenile court. The prosecution still would have been able to move some of those cases up, or to try to move some of those cases up, but at least it wouldn't start thousands of kids in the adult system. Most of those kids end up going back to juvenile court anyway. It's a huge waste of resources. It's a huge unnecessary exposure to adult jail. There's just so many problems, and that's really something I'd love to see them doing right now instead of rolling back. So that's sort of I don't know if you want me, I have slides on like the JJRA, but I would defer if other people want to jump in before.
So Ian, can you hit that point again? If they're charged as adults, they still don't separate them facility-wise?
Yeah. So when a kid is charged as an adult in Maryland and Prince George's County, they're arrested, right? All that needs to happen is the police to put the charge on the piece of paper. If it's one of the 23, which includes misdemeanor handgun possession and includes robbery with a dangerous weapon, which is very subject, as whoever was asking me about, or it was you were saying, are they charging black youth differently? I mean, all I could say is that you do see cases where, there was no weapon found. Maybe somebody says a weapon was intimated, like, a sort of hand in the pocket type thing. And then the police can say, do I charge that as a RDW, a robbery with a dangerous weapon, or charge it as a regular robbery? And when that case goes to court, it's almost certainly going to be found to be a regular robbery. But if they just put that robbery dangerous weapon charge, that puts that 16 or 17-year-old child in the adult system. And there's nothing we can do about that for months until it winds its way to a transfer hearing. So your question, what happens if a 16 to 17-year-old charged with any of those 23 offenses is charged as an adult? They are taken to the adult jail. They are booked at the adult jail. They do have a unit at the adult jail where they at least try to keep kids separately, but there are many, many flaws to that. I mean, kids are exposed to adults for many reasons at many instances in the adult jail. And the adult jail is just not where kids should be.
Absolutely.
And girls, when we're seeing girls arrested, I mean, the girls have it awful because they don't even have a unit for girls on the jail, so they're mixed in on the women's unit and exposed to kids who have any injury, could be on the medical unit with mentally ill adults who have access to them. Even just moving around the jail, there's just kids are definitely exposed to adults. And the law does say that those kids should be held in a juvenile facility. But this is the problem with starting the case in adult court, is then we have to go to court and we have to ask for that. We have to get it approved and we have to get all the paperwork, and this person has to give it to that person has to give it to the other person. You have to arrange transportation. And all that means kids spending weeks in adult jail, when they should be in a juvenile facility, when the law really recognizes that they should be. And we can fix all that just by starting those cases in juvenile court. So that's not the legislation that's before right now, but that's something that we would like to see happen. Yeah.
Right.
Anything and everything could be going on with those children, and they're traumatized.
Yeah.
And for those that's hearing this, there is a difference between what is charged and what is actually proven.
Yep.
So the charge is that key right there that exposes them. And we expect them to come back better and reformed. But these are the conditions we're putting the kids in.
I've represented so many kids who, go through that process, sit in adult jail for 3 weeks, eventually get released, and sometimes their case there wasn't much of a case to begin with, or maybe they're, kids who have the family support and we get them released and they do well in the community and they end up on probation, on juvenile probation, and do great. Obviously the news always wants to focus on the kids who get a chance and mess it up. But if you look at the numbers, kids in juvenile court are far more likely to be successful than similar kids who are incarcerated as adults. So there's been all sorts of studies throughout the country, and even the Maryland data, which I always show in court, shows that, you know, if you incarcerate a child in adult prison, or you incarcerate a similar child with a similar offense history, and again, I'm not for juvenile incarceration, but this is what the comparison is. You know, a kid who goes through a juvenile program versus adult prison is less likely to reoffend. So it keeps the public safer, but it's very easy to point at you know, because, you know, no intervention is perfect, and unfortunately, there will always be some kids who are given a chance and then go on and commit a violent crime, and we should always be thinking about how to prevent that and how to do better. But we can't use those examples to overshadow the fact that most kids who are given the chance at rehabilitation in the juvenile system are successful and don't recidivate, and that certainly kids are more likely to be successful if they're in the juvenile system and not exposed to adult prison and things like that. So.
Ian, also really quickly, I attended this forum with Vincent Charlie, and I think he also mentioned that difference that you just stated, the difference between a child who goes through the juvenile system versus the adult system, and what that means for their rehabilitation. He also mentioned that a DJS tries to not even get the child to the juvenile system, right? Like, we have seen that if they divert through other programs and other supports, that child is even more successful because they don't go through the trauma of being in front of a judge. They don't go through like the system, and so the percentage of children who either get diverted to a program or go through the juvenile system, they don't repeat their offenses. Like, that percentage is a lot higher than the very small percentage of children who, I mean, I think we're human, right? Even adults, like, people
Absolutely.
give us second chances. We don't do it again, and as humans, sometimes we do it again. But with children, that percentage is still low, right? Of the individuals who either like go and do something else or recommit that particular whatever, whether it's a misdemeanor or something else. That still like the data still proves that children are more successful if they don't go through.
Yeah, there's this big study called the Pathways to Desistance study that like studied kids in the system over I think 20 years. I mean, a long longitudinal study that shows that sort of, you know, regardless of no intervention or you know, juvenile intervention, you know, kids just do grow up, they mature, and they stop doing the dumb things that teenagers do on the whole, right? Not everybody, but
Brain development.
Brain development. So, but yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the kids who are being charged as adults are, you know, these are at least some are violent offenses that are not likely to go to diversion. They would more likely be processed through the juvenile system, but for so many kids, diverting, you know, it can be worse for a kid to go through, come to court, God forbid, be handcuffed, see themselves in that light at this time where they're forming their identity. Whereas, these diversion programs, and just is like, it's still a little opaque to me, some of I know diversion is happening in Prince George's because I'm not seeing kids come in for, you know, a lot of trespassing or, you know, malicious destruction of property. I mean, they are, for the most part, not charging those cases. And it's certainly much better to really be looking at, you know, trying to not bring those kids, you know, kids who don't need to be in the system into the system for so many reasons.
I also want to say, like, it does go back to the point that people were making earlier about resources too. Like, you have a lot of kids who, yes, they may commit a crime, but when they come out, what resources are there for them to create a situation where they don't have to commit the same crimes over and over again? It could be whether we need more recreation centers, whether people need jobs, whether people need mentorship, guidance. And that's the one thing that bringing people home who have gone to, who've been incarcerated before can be very helpful in, where you have people who may have been incarcerated, a part of the gang, can come home and kind of get people out of that circumstance and be able to get people before crimes are committed. Because the one thing that we see is that we see in Prince George's County and all over the state, the one thing is, okay, when crimes go up, we need more police, but the police aren't getting to you before you commit the crimes. They're getting to you once the crimes are already done.
Right.
So then it's like, okay, then that's just a backtrack into incarceration. but no one's solving the root cause of the issue.
Absolutely.
I want to say with that, so what you're saying is like, from what he's saying too, it's almost like the system makes us be, we're not being retroactive, we're being like after the fact.
Yeah.
So it's almost like putting more money back into resources. Like you said, they don't have to commit the crimes. Because everything you're talking about is it stems back to them going back into the system, So, literally, again, how do you take that money back from the policing side and put it back into resources against the crime that they started from? It's a setup. It's a setup.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
There definitely are programs, and like I said, I mean, the diversion, like, I don't see it directly sometimes. Those are kids who don't get charged, so they don't come to me. And we've at various times made efforts to go check out those programs and see what they're like. But, you know, there are some, right? I mean, I think the current DJS is certainly investing, and they have this new Thrive. Well, yeah, that's what we were trying to connect you with them about. This new Thrive program, which is, you know, an attempt to get resources to kids. They call credible messengers, which is, I always thought an interesting term, but it's mentors, you know, who have system involvement, who can hopefully connect with kids, and so there's things out there. But yeah, the you know, when the legislature wants to do something big, are they focusing on providing resources for that, or you know, and we can talk about what they're trying to do to the bill now, but you know, I think they just really need to focus on community-based resources, because that's the thing that'll actually improve things in the long run.
I think it can't just be like just a resource either. You know, like they gotta find out what the community actually needs. It could be just from a small thing, maybe like a pencil or a notebook. You know, they might not need a big old community center. You know, it could be they might not be eating food at nighttime or whatnot. So I think the matter of having legislation is cool, but what actually is helping out if the kid is still not getting the actual help they need to succeed? You know, again, it's finding the root of the problem. You don't want just like any kind of like watered down bill to say, you know, how you put it out there. Is that the root of the problem is getting fixed?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like, you know, you're going to try to solve it by having more school book bag drives and stuff. No, the root is really deeper than that. The root is in the family level and the community level where, you know, mom and dad they need help, kids need help, everybody needs help at that level. Prevent it. Let's talk about prevention, not, you know, not doing things after the fact, after the kid is already in trouble. The focus should be on prevention, and this legislation is not focusing on prevention. It's not focusing on anything but partial penalties. And if they're not even considering any amendments to this right now, that's scary.
Well, Clippinger definitely, reviewing the meeting from Thursday, he was striking down the amendments left and right, and the majority was agreeing with him. But what I found disturbing, that keeps ringing with me, is that none of the state's attorneys could provide data, and they mentioned kids as young as 10-year-olds, and they tended to focus on, well, not focus, that's not the correct word. They kept mentioning about violent crimes and rape. If a 10-year-old has raped another child, that's because that child has been raped, and that's what they were shown. So how do you criminalize a victim is beyond me. They also talked about if the child missed 2 appointments, that they could be put on parole past 2 years. I believe, Lorena, it said past 2 years.
They want to be able to lock up kids for missing appointments. It's beyond.
Yes, and he did say detain them, and I just find that how do you hold a 10-year-old responsible for their transportation? And quite frankly, their parents are probably catching 2 and 3 buses to get to and from work and get to and from home to the school or wherever they need to go. Buses, their transportation. So I watched him just mark those amendments, you know, off the chart, and it was so disturbing to see that.
I want to say a couple things about the 10 and 11-year-olds and 12-year-olds, because I think, like, it's one of the most, like, for one, obviously, the root of the problem is not 10, 11, and 12-year-olds. I mean, just to start there. But there's also a lot of like misinformation about what the law actually did. So before this law got passed, like you could basically put any kid in juvenile court. I mean, there was just no limits on it. And you know, God forbid you have, you know, these kids are very, very young. So the law tried to take sort of a common sense, and it was agreed upon by, when they did the Juvenile Justice Reform Bill, it was agreed upon by everyone, including the state's attorneys' representatives on the commission, to set a minimum age at 13, except for crimes of violence. So you, under the current law, as it is now, you can charge it. I'm not saying you should, but the current law allows for 10, 11, and 12-year-olds to be charged for a crime of violence. So a lot of this sort of fear-mongering doesn't even make sense because the law already allows it. You know, they want to expand it to things like motor vehicle theft, which could mean if a kid's in a car with their older cousin or older sibling, an 11-year-old, that they can be
charged, right?
Court. I mean, and possession of a handgun, which, you know, I know is contentious, but certainly if an 11 or 12-year-old has a handgun, I mean, is that, you know, kind of similar to what you were just saying? I mean, is that something that should be dealt with in juvenile court, or there's something called a sins petition and other things that interventions that can be done? The reality is, when you charge a 10, 11, or 12-year-old in juvenile court, the United States Constitution has a requirement of competency to stand trial, right? You have to have a certain understanding of the system that you're in front of in order to stand trial. And when we get these 10, 11, 12-year-olds, almost all of them, not because they're not smart or anything like that, they're just very young. They're not competent. So,
well, hell, I'm over 60. I'm not
I
competent.
don't understand it now, right?
I mean, it's true though. Like a lot of the things that we have to, you know, sort of make kids understand, a lot of adults don't know. So these kids get stuck in long competency proceedings where the proper interventions are not really available, and you know, it just doesn't make sense. The juvenile justice system, you know, for the vast majority of 10, 11, 12-year-old cases, you know, it just doesn't make sense. It's not making the community safer, and that's why there was this consensus 2 years ago to change this law. The state's attorneys, to my knowledge, have not produced information about how many kids are we even talking about here. So this really, repealing this law would just put very young kids to be vulnerable in a situation where a judge or a prosecutor decided they were going to make an example of an 11-year-old, again, who committed a non-violent crime. Because the violent crimes, the crimes of violence, you already could be charged. And again, I think a lot of those kids even shouldn't be charged if they're 10 or 11. But what we're arguing over here is not 10, 11, and 12-year-olds non-violent crimes, and you know, it's not an intervention that's going to make anyone safer. And there are other. I mean, that's what's always overlooked. Is there have been huge efforts to try to educate the various stakeholders in each county about other alternatives, whether it's the SINs, the child in need of services. I mean, again, I'm not an expert on that process, but there are other things available. So it's not like you can't do anything for an 11-year-old who is in a stolen car. You just can't hold them into court, where, you know, again, they're just going to be found not competent anyway.
Well, the statistics that we keep hearing while we were up in Annapolis the other night, 71% of the incarcerated folks in Maryland are Black. So that's like almost double the national average, right? Then we have this bill where there's some statistics about 50% of those 10 to 17-year-old, 50% of them are Black in the juvenile in DGS right now. 50%, 10 to 17. So this bill, again, we know is going to increase those numbers, and we can't have that. We cannot allow that to happen. That's the only reason this bill is being done, because they want to increase those numbers. And the reason they're increasing the numbers too is to, again, get more people into the system so that they can grow up to be in the system and support the $2 billion, $3 billion prison complex, the businesses, the Costco's, the Walmarts, all of our companies that we're buying stuff from. they're getting a lot of free slave labor from those that are incarcerated right now. So it's the school, it's almost the crib to the prison pipeline. It's like, you ain't talking about school right now, you know.
And Tamara also mentioned the missing two appointments part of this bill. I mean, before this bill passed, right, if you were on juvenile probation and you violated your probation in any way, which could mean you didn't listen to your mom at home, you missed a little bit of school, you tested positive for marijuana, you could be thrown right in jail. And there were judges who were very eager to throw those kids in jail. So you could be on probation for anything. You miss, who knows, miss school, test positive for weed, miss a few appointments, anything that could be called a violation of probation, they could lock you up. And there was a big study of Prince George's County about 10 years ago called, I think, Doors to Commitment by Annie Casey Foundation, that showed that like most of the kids incarcerated in the juvenile system in Prince George's County were there for nonviolent, low-risk kids, there for nonviolent technical violations of probation. Because again, the judge had unlimited discretion. What this bill did in 2011 is limit that discretion. If you're on probation and you're going to get locked up, it couldn't be a technical violation. You can't lock up a kid for missing school. We all know that's not going to work anyway. You can't lock up a kid for testing positive for weed. Now, if a kid commits a new offense, that's not a technical violation. If a kid runs away, cuts off an ankle bracelet, is not showing up for a point. I'm sorry, is basically absconding. If a kid has basically run away from probation, that's not a technical violation. Those kids under the current law still can be detained. I'm not saying that that's the right thing to do most of the time, but there is still an ability for kids who are truly messing up their probation to be detained. What this law now wants to reopen that, so a judge could, you miss two appointments again. Whoever said you could be 11 years old, you don't have arrived, and there's a million reasons you can miss two appointments. To open the door back up to those kids being detained is going to increase, incarceration like it was before.
So Lorena and Carlos, what do we do? What do we want to see? What do we want to have happen?
Well, I think right now, and Ian, maybe you can support me on this one. I'm looking at the amendments that passed on Thursday. So this past Thursday, the Judiciary Committee, which is on the House side, and they were voting for HB814, which is the Juvenile Law Reform Bill, or Juvenile Reform Law Bill. And this is by leadership, right? And so the bill sponsors are, and my people here, please correct me, but the bill sponsors are the chair, which is Luke Trippinger, the Judiciary. You also have the Speaker of the House, which is Adrian Jones, yep. And on the Senate side, you have the chair, Will Smith, who's sponsoring this bill. There's two bills, the same one, they just have to go through the House and the Senate through different bill numbers. And so Thursday they had a vote, and this was after a couple of hearings where there were a lot of people who went and testified. OPD was there, various community organizations and community partners were there saying, like, this is not correct. We have only had JJRA and SIPA and a couple other laws that support children for a couple of years, and DJS in the past few months had several meetings, several hearings. They went to community meetings where they were saying, this is actually working. The laws that passed are working. We just need to give it time. You can't have something that passes within a year if it's not doing what you thought it was going to do, like this miracle, that now you want to go back and remove some of these protections that we are seeing that is helpful. And so to me, the question is, if the Department of Juvenile Services, who have to deal with this every single day, if you have OPD, other organizations who are consistently working with children day in, day out, are saying, these laws are working, these laws are helping, why in turn do we have leadership, and why do we have our politicians or legislators that we voted in coming up with a law that's going to put us back, that is going to set us back, is going to remove some of these protections for children. I think some of it is the propaganda that is Fox News. A lot of it is fear, and we're not saying that community safety is not important. We're not saying that. We're saying it is important, but we also know that the rights of children are important, and that we cannot continue to traumatize children just because the government is failing them and the services that would be helpful are just not there, or just are not properly funded, so not everyone can get those services. But what we're saying is community safety is important. Within community safety is the safety of children and the rights of children. So we need to figure out what other solutions are there that are not school to prison type of, that are not incarceration, that's not charging people, right? This is just, I don't have another word for it other than being insane. And so on Thursday, they voted this out, and there were a lot of amendments that were offered by OPD, that they were offered by ACLU and other organizations, other advocates, but those amendments just did not make it. And so there were other amendments that did make it. I can definitely read them out.
Yeah, what were they?
Okay. I'm gonna have to look at my phone because I did not memorize this.
And Lorena, for the listeners, can you explain what voted out means?
Right, and so at a bill will have a hearing within the House, and so that gives you time to provide testimony, whether it's opposition or in support of that bill, and then that committee will then have a voting session where they will go and, the feedback that they got from the community, from, each other, their colleagues, and from partners, anything that's proposed are amendments. Like any changes that are proposed to the bill are considered amendments, and so they can read through them and vote. And so basically it would be like this group right here. This is the committee. We would go through the bill again, and we'll say amendment, just to paraphrase, amendment 1 is A, B, and this is what we wanted to happen. Then the committee would vote and say, add this amendment, no to that amendment, and then whatever comes out of the final vote, which is like, okay, now this is the version that we want to pass, the committee would then have to vote in order for it to move out. And so it did pass at 24-0. So the committee voted it out. And so I can read you what those amendments are. So at this moment, with the provisions that HB 14 includes these provisions that I'm going to read to you. It expands juvenile court jurisdiction for elementary school children for certain offenses involving guns, weapons, sexual assault, and animal abuse. Allows children to be incarcerated before they have been found guilty, even if they have only been charged with a misdemeanor. This will lead to more children being handcuffed, strip searched, and held in a jail cell while they wait a court date, even when they're being charged with a minor offense.
That's the one right there.
Yeah, and so the other one is it allows police to overcharge and bypass the Department of Juvenile Services by requiring certain cases to be sent to the state's attorney's office, even if the Department of Juvenile Services does not recommend charging them. This essentially removes a check on the system. So you have a check and balance. This is kind of removing one of those checks. It will drastically reduce the ability to place a child on informal supervision and divert them to services, which we know that these services actually do help children and help with the rate of crime, if you want to name it that. The other one is it extends the length of probation for children and allows the court to expand probation if a child fails to appear at a treatment program without good cause at least twice, which is what Ian was mentioning. As drafted, it doesn't matter if a child missed 2 out of 2 or 2 out of 300 appointments, and will result in punishing a kid for circumstances outside of their control, such as not being transported to the appointment by a parent, or if the bus doesn't show up, which we know the bus system is not that great. Some buses that are supposed to be coming in every 15 minutes, sometimes traffic, just the system itself, it takes 30, 40 minutes. I mean, even as an adult, right, there are some times where I don't make it to my appointment and I have a car, I'm an adult, like I have money to be able to get myself from point A to point B. We're talking about children here who might not have that support, might not have those resources, and it might be that their parents are working. And so do you want that parent who might not have that benefit of calling out of work or going in late? They have to choose between those things, between those different circumstances. So those are the amendments, and I can definitely email them out to you, Beverly, if you want to share with everyone else. But what we're asking here is, or an action that we can take is, because this was voted out through the House, and it was very disappointing, we still have time to see what the Senate, so JPR, Judicial Proceedings Committee, will pass out. Because these bills will then after have to reconcile if they're if they're different at a later time, right? To see what the final version is. So what we're asking community members, community partners to do is, and we know this is it's a huge ask, right? But whether you can do it virtually or in person, is to show up to the hearing so they know that we are there, we are present, we are monitoring, we're listening to what is going on. Because they're doing the vote this Tuesday at 10:30 a.m. is when it starts. And so this is when the Judicial Proceeding Committee, or JPR, will then go through the bill, go through the amendments, and then vote out what amendments they would like to see included, and how the bill will then move out of that committee into like a larger vote. So what we're asking people to do is, whether you can do it virtually or show up in person and fill up that room, is to be able to be there for the vote, and also to tweet. And so we want people to start tweeting as early as 9 a.m. if we can, tagging the committee, the House Judicial Committee, and then JPR from the Senate side. And we have language from MyJC, which is a coalition with different partners, that we have specific tweets and hashtags that we can use, and we're asking people to tag these legislators to let them know that this is something that we don't want to pass, and that we want to make sure that they remove the harmful provisions before the bill gets to
How do people access the social media? Is it on the coalition's website? Or?
So it's all through an email, and there's these toolkits, so I can definitely send it to.
I have it because Sydney sent it, right?
Yes,
so
he said.
if you guys are on their list, Sydney Moore would have sent it, but I can forward it to everybody.
Yes, I
that's
think
here right now as
so.
well, so you can get access to it.
Yeah, I think the email that we sent out. Sorry, I think the email that we sent out last night is the individuals that attended Lobby Day. So it would be great. We're gonna send it out. We did miss because I was typing really fast. I'm sorry, y'all. I missed 3 senators that we really need to include on the Senate side for phone calls. So we're asking people to just. Sometimes you're not even gonna get to speak to a staff person, but if you are like leaving your voicemail. A lot of times what they ask you to do is say your name and your zip code or your district, because they want to make sure that you are part of their district or that you are a Maryland resident. And so it's just your name, your district, and saying like this is what we want. And so all that information is available through the Google toolkits that MyJC and other partners have worked on, and I can send them to you, Beverly, so you can share them out.
Do you send it to that list that we made last year? I mean, we should add whoever wants to get it to that. Because there, what was it called? The
Prince George's Juvenile something.
Yeah, but I can definitely share it out. So that's what we're hoping to do this Tuesday, is to make sure that people are either filling the virtual Zoom room during the voting session, and you can watch that through YouTube. So the numbers that they'll see, they'll be able to showcase that there. And if you're able to make it, I know it's going to Annapolis is a huge hurdle, but if you're able to make it to Annapolis, to just be there for the hearing or for the voting session, and just so we can fill up that room so they know that people are watching, people are monitoring this bill. We were there for Lobby Day, and we met with Lou Clippinger from the House side, Chair Lou Clippinger. We had conversations. He did mention amendments. We just did not know that these are the amendments that he was referring to. But it's just important that we're tracking this and that we are protecting children, because we're fighting this huge propaganda that is Fox News. We're fighting this false narrative that has been spread throughout the state that children are committing crimes at such a high rate, that the police officers are not able to do their job. Debatable. That, there's no protection, that there's no safety. And again, what we're saying is community safety is important, but that also includes children's rights, and we just need to figure out, aside from what data has shown, that services and resources do support children and do deter crime, let's look at other options as well that do not include incarceration rates. So I can definitely send that information to you, Beverly, with the updated committee members, if you can share that out with the rest of the group.
What time is the hearing on Tuesday?
Miss, it's at
10:30.
10:30. 10:30. So it's early in the morning.
I just wanted to add something. Certainly, Fox News is the most egregious offender. It is by no means the only offender.
Right.
The entire, as Beverly was talking about, the whole economic apparatus around the criminal justice system, or injustice, as a lot of us like to say it. And that couldn't just be propped up by Fox News. The entire corporate media apparatus is complicit and is participating in this. So I think back to the earlier point about the need of greater political education, I think we've got to choose some other news options. I'm a big fan of WPFW. There are other news options, but as long as our singular options are the corporate media, we're going to get the same type of reinforcement,
Right.
and propaganda that Marina is talking about.
You're definitely right. And just to add on, what else? When you're reaching out to your delegates, senators, we always tell people to lead with any personal story or personal info that you know about it, because a lot of them they're not living a normal day-to-day life. They don't know some of the struggles that people who aren't higher class have, or have just an abundance of funds have. So letting them know how this affects people on a day-to-day life, how this bill will affect your children, your nieces, nephews, cousins, and so forth as well. And just highlighting on some of the amendments that you said, Lorena, just to hear about how certain crimes against animals are affecting children, to where we're now treating children worse than we're treating animals. We're choosing Black and brown children to kind of see as, okay, you're more of a problem than we care to address. I mean, you said it right. The police are doing what they've been trained to do, is to hurt our communities and make things worse for us. So we need to address how we look at change. And the issue too is that we've seen in Black communities specifically of this push up, oh, we need the police to keep us safe, we need the police to keep us safe. And I think there needs to be more kind of a shift to that really didn't happen in the past. When we talk about things like the war on drugs, times where the police were heavily in our communities, we didn't see us getting safer. So we need to look at how can we keep us safe in our own communities by knowing our neighbors, knowing what's going on, not being afraid to say, hey, let me stop this situation now before it gets worse, rather than wait till it gets worse and then say, oh, well, we need the police to come and lock people up now.
Right.
When those young people are in jail, they're missing school time. So are there any alternative schools or special tutoring for them?
Well, I mean, there's a school in the detention center, but I mean, there's just so many ways in which it's harmful for kids who don't need to be pulled out of their communities to be pulled out even for short periods of time. So even though there's a school in there, there's all sorts of challenges to credits transferring, and a lot of times, if kids are locked up for short periods of time, even though they might be in classes while they're in there, they're not in their classes and getting back and trying to reacclimate to school. And then there's just, there's a lot of evidence that incarceration is just bad for kids. And, I think, certainly there's always going to be discretion to detain kids on really violent offenses, but a lot of this bill is aimed at misdemeanors and missing a few sessions of your therapy. I mean, those are not problems that should be addressed through incarceration. And I do remember, because it wasn't that long ago, that when the Prince George's County Courts was trying to use incarceration to address those types of problems, and the harm is just immense because kids also, kids will do better if they feel they have been treated fairly. Like a kid can weather the experience of being locked up in the juvenile system. Kids are really resilient, and a lot of our kids do have good family and community support, and if they don't, there's things that can be given to them. But I remember kids, being detained for things like missing school when the judge couldn't possibly understand the challenges that they're facing. That detention is just the wrong, and we're not saying kids should be held accountable. Accountability is a good thing, and there's so many ways to do it that don't involve incarceration. And I've also seen our courts use, alternative ways of holding kids accountable through a million different incentives and and things you can do. But detention for misdemeanor offenses, nonviolent, it's just that really is damaging to children, but also to the community and to the whole system when we have this when those things are happening.
So what other alternatives have been proposed at this time instead of incarceration? Any type of vocational schooling or training institutions or anything like that instead of putting them in jail? Are there any proposals that are out there that will say, instead of locking kids up because we know how harmful it is to them physically, mentally, and spiritually, are there any programs that are out there that would take them out of the judicial system and put them in a better environment that is wholesome to make them adjust if they're misdemeanor? They stole some bread, okay? You don't want to lock a child up for stealing off bread and put them in jail for 5 or 6 months. And there could be some other, like, transitional placement or something. The parents can't handle them, the system can't handle them, but put them in another type of environment that could still make them be a whole person instead of turning into a criminal because they've gone into the prison system. After they've gone into the prison system, they pick up really bad habits. And their environment.
Lives will change forever.
Yeah, so are there any proposals like for transitional housing or transitional training in the area? We spend tax dollars on building all these stores and restaurants and all these gas stations and fast food restaurants. But do we think about every child doesn't deserve to go to the judicial system or go to jail? Are there other alternatives that have been thought about need to be put on the table?
Yes.
Is there in the bill any funding for?
There's no funding for, or what I've read of the bill, and I'll definitely check if I can get that. But that's one of the concerns that it was saying that they do reference services, and there are services that do exist. So there's one of the things that a lot of people bring up is SINS, which is child in need of services, and so it's like that diversion, right? And we're talking about children, so anyone that's 18 or younger, because after 18, I believe the services are different. But there are programs that they're able to do within that under 18, right? There's no funding that goes through that. I think they've mentioned Thrive, but I can't fully delve into that right now because I need to look at the full amendment and what they're proposing through Thrive. But from our conversation with Luke Clippinger on Delegate Luke Clippinger on Monday was that Thrive would be a certain amount of money Thrive doesn't have a specific like programs that the money would go into, because like the community would have to choose. So it's always, you know, the community will choose, and it's like services that will support children. So it's like a very broad, vague, which is great, right? Like if there's more money for the services, that's awesome. But we don't need to to have a bill that incarcerates children for you to give it the programs. You can just do the programs, but there's diversion programs. So like it could be like a mentorship. It could be they would have to go evaluate basically like what are your needs and go through there. So that does exist, but within this bill, it's more focusing towards, let's put you in the juvenile system, let's criminalize you, and then go from there. When we're working with our partners, and Ian, you might have more information on that question, but when we're working with our partners from this coalition called the Maryland Second Look Coalition, they talk about their experiences behind bars, like when they were incarcerated, that there were kids who were put into the adult system, and what they would do is they would get them and like mentor them and say, this, you know, like this is how you can survive. This is what you're able to do to just stay sane and protected within the carceral system. And so they would mentor them, and all of this is community at this point, right? It's not the services that the system is offered, but this is because they know what it's like to go through this. They know that they entered the system at 15 years old, and they're seeing someone as young as them, or 18 or 19 or whatever the age is, but still so young. They take them in and try to guide them, and so you're seeing that from a community perspective within the prison system, right? And then once you go into the community, once you're integrated into the community, once again, there are community programs who work with children to mentor them, to make sure that they're not going down the wrong path, and that there's, whether the services are, sometimes it's as simple, I would say simple, but it's not simple, right? It's having your basic needs met, which is food, clothing, these items that we might have quicker access to, but some individuals don't. My sister works in Baltimore City schools, and she gets to know her students really well, so she'll pick up on their body language or how they're showing up to school and say, okay, we need to send more food to this family because I've noticed that at lunchtime they're grabbing more food, and so I want to make sure that they're eating at night. And if it's over the weekend, right, it's on Friday, they pack extra food, because again, it's that love and it's that community that keeps people going. And I just wish that instead of us focusing on bills that incarcerate people, that we would really fund services and resources that the community needs, because maybe if someone is fed, like gets dinner or gets clothing or something, that they wouldn't think that they need to go and do something outside of that, right? And so there are programs. I wish that this bill focused more on providing those resources without the piece on incarceration. I'll also say that for my personal experience in this legislative session, we've seen state's attorneys and we've seen other individuals support the Second Look Act, which is amazing, right? We want people to support the Second Look Act, which is some of the people who would be beneficiaries are people who have gone through JJRA, which is they went in at a young age and were able to get their sentence reduced because of the age that they went into. And sometimes when they're supporting that, they miss the connection that JJRA is essential, right? Like children's rights and protections are essential, so we don't have to go through this. And so sometimes they'll support the Second Look Act and then support the other bill that is saying that we need more children, or that basically gives that more pathways for a child to enter the juvenile system, to enter the criminal system. And so I just hope that they're able to see those connections and to be able to to stop the, I guess, the push and the need to criminalize children, because as Ian has shown, and Carlos and others have shared that the system criminalizes Black children at a higher rate than anyone else, right? Even if the percentage that you see that's white, whether it's Hispanic or not, like that's still a very small percentage compared to the amount of children who are Black who are within the criminal system. So
I'm gonna say one thing though quick, that obviously like so important to meet kids' basic needs. The kids like also really need and want a sense of belonging and something to be part of. And like there are programs like Creative Suitland in Prince George's County who like just the coolest, greatest arts program. All these like the people working there are just like, I wish honestly I could send more kids, and we do. We send some kids, we tell them about Creative Suitland, and we've had a handful of kids go and show up and be part of their, whether it's their poetry or painting or whatever arts programs they have, and have a really cool experience there, and they express an interest in doing more for kids in the system, but they don't have resources. So who's like going around and saying, okay, we're going to do these block grants, we're going to identify this Tomorrow's Boxing program, Creative Suitland, and probably 5 other programs I never heard of, give them each $100,000 to hire and staff working with kids in the system, and like plenty of the kids we represent, would be interested in doing something like that. But if they don't have the resources and they're trying to just barely stay afloat and add it on to what they're already doing, it doesn't work. So, I mean, all those things, could be done, and I know there are people who want to do that, but the legislature has to support that kind of thing.
Well, and all of this, I have a question though. Go ahead.
100 Black men is an excellent group that works with young people. Young guys, I guess it's young as 7 on up. And they've included some girls too, because they've had meetings at my real estate company. And they do a lot of great things while they're there. They learn a lot about leadership and trying to work with a group. It's just wonderful what they do. And I don't know how often they meet.
I'd love to meet that person, because I don't know that one.
They're locally, and I can try to supply you with names.
yeah, they came to one of the hearings as well, and talked about I think they were part of the Maryland Second Look Act, and thank you for bringing that up, because that's a huge thing, having programs or that that tap into the creativity, or just like here's a space you can hang out, it's safe, you'll be here with your peers, but yes, they're a great organization.
They came to Lobby Day last year and was in Nick Shaw's office.
They came this year too. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and I do have a contact card, Ian. I can try to get you that.
Yeah, there's Baltimore Algebra Project. There's in Baltimore City, in the southeast part of it. There was like a bike repair shop that like you can drop in. Yeah, there and so it's like so many kids love bikes. There's like a joke that like it's the groundhog, but it's like in Baltimore or like in other places, if you hear the bikes coming out, that's when you know spring is coming. But like there's just different areas that can be like hubs for kids to just be children and to feel safe and to, like you said, to feel like they belong. Thank you for bringing that up, Ms. Todd.
These are the examples of we keep us safe. Like we as community know what we need. Like you said, we have the responsibility. We have almost an obligation. We have to work on this within our communities, because we cannot continue to think that the police want to. I don't get it. I don't understand why that's still a thing. Like we keep us safe within our communities. We know what we need. Who better?
We've been culturally conditioned to think that policing is equal safety, when we know in reality, if you think about the history of policing, ain't nothing safe about it. It never has been. It was instituted to keep people in control, namely my ancestors who were enslaved. And then after enslaving people, to keep you from being free. So when you start off, when you have a foundation like that, how can that create safety? It will never create safety.
I have a question though, before you move on, because she asked, was there any kind of legislation like being proposed outside of the kids like going to the system? Y'all mentioned like all the programs and whatnot, but I want to say that the overall to be just like no, because of boys because why do the kids have to be in the system prior to getting assistance? So that's, you know what I'm saying, that's an issue.
It's
So,
a problem.
yeah, so how is there not anything proposed saying that, hey, because you have all these programs out here that you can mention, that you can, whether, you know, they're the programs, whether it's in there or not, they can get funded or not, but why is there no any kind of laws just saying where they can reference the kids to these programs versus saying we're gonna send them to the system instead? Is there not stuff like that being worked on right now? And it's no.
So when I went to Lobby Day, right, I met with Delegate Lewis, Jazz Lewis, and I had mentioned that, I said when a child comes into kindergarten, right, that first quarter, the teacher can kind of gauge what type of situation they're dealing with. Like if there's an issue with the child and you have reached out to the parent and maybe there's a poor response to that situation, you already know. And so I asked him, why don't at that time we say, hey, this is a child in need of wraparound services as well as their parents, not just the child. And so his response was, they started a program in September, and please forgive me, what the program is, I don't know. But we could definitely reach out to his office to ask again what was the name of the program. But he said it started in September, and they actually supposedly have started some type of program that addressed the entire family for services. And he said it's going to take a while for the data and yada, yada, yada. But at the same token, it feels almost like, and I'm sure I'm not correct in saying this, but it just feels like that information is not readily available to the community. It's not. And unless I had that conversation with him, I would have not known that something exists. I know when I was in the school system, they had a position where the staff member was assigned to, if the kid was excessively tardy or missing, and that person would tap in and say, hey, what do you need? And they would touch base with the parents. But their salary was very low. I don't think they could keep people in those positions. There was no growth for the position either. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, that's the money in, and it's all a funding problem. So we talk about all of this. I think all of us in this room are basing this on the assumption that the system respects kids, and it just doesn't. And so the problem starts so much lower than just this bill. The problem is we've criminalized being a child in today's society. There are no longer third spaces. We no longer have the sense of eternal community. And so we're stuck with these kids who, the mask was torn straight off. I was radicalized during the pandemic. I have a 6, 11, and 13-year-old, and I watched their services take a nosedive, never recover, but my friends were still allowed to go to bars. I mean, you cannot tell me that we respect children when they are still so far behind. They're still learning on computers instead of being taught face-to-face in class, because that was just easier. And the teachers have not received any training for this. So we have this entire generation of kids that is growing up completely unmoored, and we don't know what to do with them. So our response is just throw them in jail. So my problem with all of this is that the services have to start in the community, and that is so hard to find already overstretched communities where parents are working 2 or 3 jobs, and then also say, but you have to work and build this whole new community, this whole new support system. So that's where, like, where do we disrupt that part of the system? It's so frustrating to watch all this happen.
Is it our local, like at the county council level, the budget for the county, right? Do we really start strongly, is that possible, to advocate for more money around these types of things for our communities? Because if we don't ask for it, they're not going to give it to us, right?
I think so. I think that's a really great point. And I think sometimes we're talking about the state level work, but the local work is really important, right? Like, this is where, you know, it's harder for you to get to Annapolis, which is sucks, and I have a lot to say on that, because I think everyone should have access to their legislators in Annapolis, to have, you voted them in. This is your tax money going into work, and so it's important you have access to that. But really going back to the local piece, right, you can go to budget meetings and hearings and say, we don't need more money for police, or we don't need more money for these programs that are fully funded, right? We're talking about millions and millions of dollars. What we need are these third spaces. What we need is like the Creative Suitland program, or 100 Black Men, or whatever else programs that are out there that we can say, hey, we need our children need this, and this is where our money should go. And so I think it is important to look at the local, and this is more something that Carlos can help with now that he's in Prince George's, but how do we work at a local level to be able to fight for what the community needs? And it's not like we're begging for it, like, this is our tax money and we want it to be shifted. It's not about, people get stuck between defunding and like all these like words. We don't need to get stuck on that. But what we're saying is, we don't need the police, or if the community is saying this, we don't want more money to go to the police departments. Where do you want it to go, right? Like, yes, where do you want it to go? Reach out to them and like organize, because it's really important when they not only see the same faces, but they're seeing more people, that they're seeing, okay, I'm getting these phone calls from this district over here that I haven't heard from, and they're really saying that they don't want, that they need funding for these programs. And so how can we make it work? And it's really putting pressure onto your elected officials and saying, we voted you in, we need you to do right by the community, and this is what we think would be right for our children. And so I think that's a really great step, is organizing and then showing up and being consistent, because what they expect, or at least, my perspective, what they expect is for people to say like, okay, they'll get over it in a month, or they'll get over it in 6 months, because it's a long game. It's a long game, right? And some people have been doing this work. Ms. Dot has been doing police reform work for over 30 years, I would say, right? It's tiring. It is so much on the body, on the mind, on emotions, on everything, and so they just expect you to give up. And so this is when the community piece comes in, where if Ms. Dot is like, hey, I need to tap out, Beverly, Tamara, or someone else can come in and say, okay, then we'll keep fighting for you, and then so you're not burning out. But I would say local organizing, focusing on your council members, is really important at a local level to make those changes, because sometimes at the state level you're fighting with so many, but you want to make sure that if you start with maybe Prince George's County or Greenbelt or whatever the local locality is, that you can like make consistent changes and then make progress at a state level altogether, because you're seeing that pressure.
And to your point, Lorena, about, as I had mentioned earlier, about funding police, if you're going to fund the police, they don't need to be funded for more weapons. They don't need money for overtime to patrol and arrest, but they need money to run proper programs. Now, we were at an event last year, Angela also Brooks held over in Suitland. Bunch of rhetoric about the kids and crime and all, but I met an officer there that was, I guess he overheard me talk about boxing, and he said, we have a PALS program, which is Police Athletic League, and we have a boxing program. And I said, you certainly do not. And he said, oh yeah, we do, we've been working out with the kids. I said, but I'm on the Potomac Valley Association. Your sanction for shows would have to come through us. You don't have a boxing program. So we had this conversation. We went back and forth, and I finally met, after talking with the chief, he was like, look, where we were in Texas, we had an awesome boxing program, and they did. California has an awesome PALS program that's supported. Those kids have tournaments, they compete, and these competitions lead them to the Olympic trials. So these competitions are a necessity for our kids. They have boxing, football. It's not just, the sport of boxing, but long story short, Hogo has collaborated, and we were like, okay, what have you been doing with this boxing program? They have about 20 kids. but they don't have the funding. And so now Hogo is going to champion for that funding. We're actually going to put together their first show June 1st in Palmer Park. And it's going to be free to the community. But these are kids we are saying, you know, hey, here is a place you can come. Here are some officers that are young brothers that are interested in building and fostering positive relationships. So policing doesn't have to be about arresting. And like I told somebody the other day, quite frankly, if you steal my damn car, yes, I'm going to call the police. If you break in my house and I don't get my hand on my gun, I'm going to call the police. But that's not to say that that's what they have to be about. It could be something positive, especially for our young men that want to have a positive role model. And we have so many fathers, black men that don't get credit. It's a lot of black men volunteering their times in these gyms. They're working with these kids after they've worked 10, 12 hours a day, and they're sitting in these gyms with these kids at night. They don't get the credit. I think the most beautiful thing is going to the playground and seeing a black man with his babies on the swing and on the sliding board. They don't get that credit. So we have a lot of positive men in our communities with their dreads and with their pants sagging. They do a lot of positive, beautiful things with our children. They don't get the credit. They show up. They don't get the credit. So the narrative in the media does have to be changed. Like Gus said, it's not just Fox, it's a lot of media.
Can I plug in?
You sure can.
Can I plug in the, because I think Ian, you mentioned about children who sometimes miss their appointment because they just don't have a ride, or whether it's transportation or whatever the issues is. Tamara did this really great event a couple months ago around
the reentry simulation,
where you go in, and I talk about it with a lot of people because sometimes, you know, I'm not directly impacted, right, on this level. So I can say I understand to a certain extent as I'm working with individuals, I'm listening to their stories, and we're working in that way. But I've never gone to jail. I've never gone through the system, and so there's certain things that I myself still don't fully grasp. And so the re-entry was like really great, really eye-opening to say, like, there are people who really want to get their life and their stuff together, but once you went to the re-entry, it's like, I ran out of bus passes, or I don't have a cell phone, so I can't get to this particular thing. So it's sometimes you do, and I get it, like, depending on how you are as a learner, sometimes you need to be in that position to see, like, what the impact and what the hurdles are. And so I thought that was a really great event and activity that you did, and I think more people should go through it. And if there's one for children, I think that would be really great, because the individuals who are making these laws are adults.
Yeah.
And their children might not be ever impacted by it, right?
Right.
So I think it's great that you did that event, and I talk about it.
We're trying to do it again, Lorena, and we're waiting for them to open up a training opportunity for us to be facilitators. So we could do it ourselves without waiting on the assistance of DOJ. So
I'm about to bring it to Baltimore, to other places.
Okay.
I think it's a really great.
We're gonna bring up Charles County too.
We'll do
I think
it.
It's really great for people. A lot of the directly impacted folks from the Maryland Second Vote Coalition, or just, I was talking to them and said, like, this was a really great similar, because they were telling me their experiences, right? They were saying how when they were as returning citizens, like recent returning citizens, they didn't have a phone, and there was one they went to get this service, and they were like, well, can you call? And he's like, well, I'm asking to get a phone, and you're asking me to call to get that phone. To get my credit.
Right.
I wouldn't need to get a phone. And so they're, can I use your phone? And so he was just saying how it was just this back and forth. And then that got me thinking to the re-entry simulation, where it's like, yeah, like we went through that. I was one of the, I think I was one of the services. So I was giving out like food benefits, like food stamps and other things. So I would love to do the actual re-entry situation, but we were just discussing that where he said, yeah, I was trying to get a phone and they were asking me to call a number
to get a phone. Crazy.
Like, I don't have a phone, and you know, like he can laugh about it now, but it's like a real dire situation for people when it's like you might not have a support system when you're re-entering a community, and so they're trying to build that themselves. And so it'd be great, right, if our legislator is providing these grants, is providing this funding.
Yeah, positive funding.
There's so many great ideas, but really what comes down to it is like, is there funding for it? And so I just wanted to plug that in because I thought that was a really great activity.
And you know what? I'm glad you brought that up too, because I was the church in that simulation. And I only had so much food in my pantry, and then the rest of the people coming to me for help, I could offer prayer. And quite frankly, that's what a lot of people get, is offer prayer. And to me, don't take this the wrong way, but the churches in our community are failing us. There's one on every corner. So why can't you, if you're getting the tax write-off that you get, why can't you open your doors in the evenings to these children for tutoring and for feeding them, homework, whatever, but especially your mega churches. So if you're getting the tax write-off that you're getting, I wish they would mandate that they also do community service time themselves. And the developers coming in our communities, why can't you, if you're going to get the tax breaks that you're getting, why can't you come into the schools and offer training to the students to do the jobs that you need so that you could have us employment staying in our communities as well? Since you're benefiting and you're gaining, why can't you contribute as well? So that's another thing. And with Concerned Citizens for Bail Reform, we did do a segment, if you go to our website, on church silence. We have a lot of mothers that said, I went to my pastor and I was looking for help, to the young lady's point about money for fighting for her child. And the only thing the pastor could say is, well, sister, let's pray. Let's have prayer. And then you'll hear pastors say, well, I have a beautiful program. We go do a Bible study down at prison ministry. Faith without works is dead, right? So I'm asking the churches to get to working.
But it's 12:30. We're supposed to be done by 12. But any final thoughts or anything, guys?
Just want to try to, on the reentry, and again, WPFW, I'm not on their board. I'm not getting any money from them, but every Tuesday at 10 a.m., Roach Brown does a show called, what's it called? It's focused on returning citizens. Forget the name. Oh, Crossroads, that's the name.
Crossroads,
so every
yes.
Tuesday at 10 a.m. they have a show. It's a great resource, and I'm sure we can provide some resources. So you call in, you can help them, help promote resources that we have. I think a larger issue, well, let me summarize with that one later. I think we also have to ask ourselves, and in the meantime, as a stopgap, certainly nonprofits can help, but I think we really need to seriously ask ourselves, is that actually going to be a long range? Is that sustainable? In other words, if we maximize the nonprofit programs that actually exist, would that be enough? It wouldn't be.
It wouldn't be.
So I think we need to ask those questions in terms of where we go.